start recording. We are here in session number 21 of Biblical Backgrounds. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines as we study together through the archaeology, the geography, the historical background, and miscellaneous other stuff that I find interesting that gives us depth and perspective on the biblical narrative. As I've probably said many times, the background details don't prove the Bible. I don't think the Bible needs proof. What it does is illustrate. It makes it more clear. When the critics attack the Bible, typically they are ignorant of the background. The better you understand how well the biblical story fits into its broader background, the more you're likely to believe that the Bible is an accurate statement of the facts as they really are. So this is just a part of biblical studies. Today we're going to look at the background of what we call Passion Week. Jesus' last days in Jerusalem, leading up to the crucifixion, the resurrection, of course, and those climactic events that climax the life of Christ. It's all very important stuff. We have a surprising amount of detail, particularly in and around the city of Jerusalem. So we'll look at that. And I guarantee I'm going to miss a lot of stuff. In an hour's worth of slides, there's so much that we can't cover, but we'll do the best we can. We'll share the screen. Let me see if I can make it work. Yes. Okay, and now it's trying to come up. Aha, yes. And some of you have seen the pictures of these kids before. Both of these shots were taken in Jerusalem. The sheep and goats sale or market happens every Thursday outside a place we call St. Stephen's Gate. And Stephen's Gate, probably the gate we see today, wasn't even there in biblical times. It was an entirely different place, but we still call it Stephen's Gate, or sometimes we call it the Lion's Gate, and that's where we find the goat market. The fact that sheep and goats are still sold in Old Jerusalem is a fascinating little bit of trivia. Jesus ran into sheep and goats all over the place. He talks about in the upper or in the Olivet Discourse, which is described in the Gospel of Matthew. He talks about a judgment of sheep and goats. And he just had to look over at Jerusalem to see them and watch the shepherds separating the sheep from the goats. We do it with a long stick, kind of fun. The kids on the left, I shot in the old city of Jerusalem. The little girl is looking for help from somebody. The two boys are not so sure who I am or whether I should be taking pictures. But I took their picture anyway because they stood still for me, and eventually I got smiles out of all of them. But I really like this picture. Little kids all over the world are very much alike. I honestly don't know if these little kids are Jewish or Christian or Muslim. To me, it doesn't matter. They're little kids with a tremendous future and the potential to make a real change in the world. So I'd like them to be my friends, whoever they are. Yes. So I took their picture. They remind me of Jerusalem, and I can't help but think that Jesus would have reacted to these kids the same way that the rest of us do. Let me show you a map of Jerusalem that should be fairly familiar. Oh my, where's my cursor? There it is. Again, with north at the left, the Kidron Valley is at the top of this image. The Hinnom Valley, Gehenna, is at the bottom of this picture. The Temple Mount is the rectangular shaped thing. This particular Temple Mount area is the Temple Mount as it existed in New Testament times. The eastern hill of Jerusalem, shaped like a tongue, we call it the Ophel, which is a Hebrew word that means the tongue, is just to the south of the Temple Mount. That's the oldest part of Jerusalem and very difficult to excavate. It's completely covered with residential buildings, apartments, and they're all owned by Palestinian Arabs who have lived in Jerusalem ever since the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. So you can't just bulldoze their houses and dig. That would be wrong, even though I would love to be able to do it. But as houses come up for sale, it's sometimes possible to purchase them and make small excavations in various places. And over the years, we've gathered a little bit of information about that. To the west of that eastern hill is the Central Valley. It's sometimes called the Tyropoean Valley, which means the cheesemakers valley, believe it or not. And back in the day, the people who made cheese from goat's milk worked in that area, and there was an actual valley. Today, that so-called Central Valley is mostly filled up with the rubble of the multiple destructions of the city of Jerusalem. And it's not so much a valley anymore as a relatively lower spot. When we get farther west from the Central Valley, we come up onto what is called the Upper City or the Western Hill of Jerusalem, and sometimes called Mount Zion. And it's in that upper or western Zion Hill that several important things are going to happen. The Last Supper probably took place on that western hill. And also parts of the judgment of Christ took place in that vicinity. The location of the tomb of Christ is controversial. There are two places in Jerusalem that are the leading candidates for the honor of being the tomb and the place of the resurrection. One is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's where the Catholic tradition places the tomb. Gordon's Calvary, or the Garden Tomb, is on the north side, outside the walls of the old city beyond the Damascus Gate. And that's a location that is favored by many Protestants. And it is really a much more pleasant spot to visit. When we tour Jerusalem, I always take groups through Jerusalem, of course, and I always take my groups to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre so they can see all of that. And I also take them to the Garden Tomb. Usually we go to the Garden Tomb in an afternoon, and I plan to spend a couple of hours, and we usually have the Lord's Supper there. It's a much more pleasant spot for evangelicals to visit. Which one is the correct spot is controversial, much debated, and there's actually good arguments for both places, and there are actually problems with both places, but both places are possible, and we wish we knew Well, we don't know, so we won't worry too much about it. Okay, it's surprising how many things are trackable in the last week of Christ. When you plot this on a map, we can't get everything exactly right, but we can get awfully close on an awful lot of things. The last week of ministry focuses, and you can see a bunch of little green boxes, A, B, C, D, F, G, and H. Those are, there's an E at the Pool of Bethesda. The week started out in Bethany, but many of the things that happened during that final week happened on the Temple Mount. Interactions with the Pharisees and Sadducees, the priests, the Sanhedrin, the cleansing of the temple, disputes with various ones, teaching the disciples. A lot of stuff happens on the Temple Mount. Jesus' week started out in Bethany, which is to the east of the Mount of Olives. And so it's Bethany is actually just beyond the top of this slide. There's not much to see in modern Bethany. And I'll show you some pictures here in just a second. Modern Bethany is an Arab community. It's a little difficult to visit because, well, frankly, there is often rioting there for reasons that I don't understand very well. I have the same attitude toward Israel as I have toward the Philippines, that I don't live there, so I don't get involved in the politics very much. But it's amazing how often the Arabs in the Jerusalem area feel the need to set a dumpster on fire and throw rocks at policemen. And that's almost never a good idea. But it helps them blow off steam or something. As long as they don't kill anybody, I guess it's okay. But that makes, frankly, it makes Bethany a difficult place to visit. Lazarus' tomb is traditionally located there. And there is, in fact, a tomb there in Bethany, in an old church that it no longer functions as a church. And I've never known it to be possible to actually visit the tomb in that church, which is in the crypt. But that's where the books say that Lazarus was buried. We don't know, but that's a possibility. Anyway, from Bethany up onto the Temple Mount and back in and around. The Last Supper happened on the Western Hill, and the modern upper room is not the place. If you go to Jerusalem today with a guide, the guide will take you to a room on the Western Hill, really close to the traditional Tomb of David and to the Dormition Abbey, which is a Roman Catholic church. The claim is that this is the upper room. In fact, the room is medieval. It has Gothic arches and the pavement that was laid down in the 8th century. It isn't the upper room. It isn't even possible. But there are structures there that relate to things that date back to the time of, shortly after the time of Christ. There's a Church of the Holy Apostles that at one time stood on the site of the traditional location of the Last Supper. And that was torn down along with a newer church called, appropriately, the New Church, or the Nea. That also was torn down by Muslim conquerors in order to build the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock up on the Temple Mount. So those churches are completely gone except for some little bits of footings. We're pretty sure we know where the new church was. And 10 years ago, we found some evidence during a remodeling of the traditional Tomb of David, which is also very unlikely to be the Tomb of David. Some cuts in the rock suggested a corner on which a monumental building stood. We think almost certainly that was the Church of the Holy Apostles, which was clearly built on top of the traditional location of the Last Supper. And that's the best we have. The upper room that's shown today is close to that. So we know the general spot. Anyway, that happened. The Garden of Gethsemane is located by the H on this map. From the H, you can look up at the eastern gate and see the wall of the old city. The term Gethsemane means the olive press of Simon. Gat or Get is the olive press, and Semene means belonging to Simon. The garden that is associated with the olive press is still there. There are some olive trees in that garden that are 2,000 or more years old. So there are trees that you can see today in the Garden of Gethsemane, which date back to the time of Christ. Maybe they were olives during the life of Jesus. It's hard to know, but there are some very, very old trees in that garden. It's quite the place. The meeting of the disciples probably took place in one of the caves where the olive presses are set up. And we can actually get into those caves today. The trial before the high priest probably happened at the place labeled 8, either 8 or 11, right in that area. It's a part of what's called the Armenian Quarter. The Armenian Quarter, why would there be an Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem? I don't know. It's strange. There's a whole lot of history going on here. And the Armenian Patriarchate is there, and a model of Mount Ararat is there. It's a very interesting part of Jerusalem, and I really like the area. There's a couple of restaurants that are really fun to visit, down underground restaurants with pillars and stuff. Very, very, very good cooking. They're nice people, but you find a lot of interesting stuff in there. Among others, there's a pavement that belongs to Caiaphas, the high priest, and we can associate it archaeologically. The trial before Pilate is under the labels 10 and 12, and that marks the entrance to the city of Jerusalem at the so-called Joppa Gate. The Joppa Gate is controlled by this big monumental structure that we call the Citadel, David's Citadel. This was built by Herod the Great, had nothing to do with King David at all. And it was a brand new monumental audience hall, residence for the governor. It's very, very likely that the interview before Pilate took place here at the Citadel. The traditional location of the interview of Jesus takes place up at the Antonia Fortress, which is on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, and was just a military barracks with defensive positions there was nothing there that would have worked as a place for Pilate's interview with Jesus. It just doesn't work. Had to have been at the Citadel. Anyway, the scourging by Roman soldiers may have happened in the Damascus Gate area. We find a guard room under the medieval Damascus Gate that dates back to the time of Christ. And on the pavement of that gate room, there is inscribed, using a chisel, a game board for a thing that we believe was the so-called Roman game, or the prisoner's game. The soldiers would roll dice and either hit the prisoner or get money or whatever. And we find that at the Damascus Gate. It's entirely possible that the actual Via Dolorosa ought to track from the Citadel to the Damascus Gate and out the Damascus Gate to a place of execution to the north of that. Roman Catholics and others of the Catholic nationalist group, the Eastern churches, hold to the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional tomb. Now let's look at a bunch of places as we go along here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the public ministry of Jesus here in Judea on the last of the things. This shot on the left is obviously night shot from the old city of Jerusalem. When you've been to Jerusalem a few times as a tour guide, as I have, one of the things you discover is the ways to get up on the roof. Jerusalem is a surprisingly complex city, but if you know your way around, it's actually possible to travel almost all over the particularly the Arab quarter of Jerusalem on the rooftops. Just going from one building to another, walking on the roof. And as long as places aren't fenced off, it's wide open. There are stairways built, and there are little bridges built, and there are all kinds of ways of getting around up on the roof. So this is a shot from the roof of a youth hostel in Jerusalem, looking toward the Dome of the Rock. You see the Golden Dome toward the left, and then way off in the distance there's a spire on top of the Mount of Olives. And that's the Russian church of the Ascension into heaven. According to Catholic tradition again, that's the very spot where Jesus ascended into heaven. Now, all the Bible tells us is that Jesus ascended from the Mount of Olives. And if you want to think about the Ascension when you're in the Chapel of the Ascension, I think that's just fine. But I actually don't believe we can know for sure where this specifically happened. At any rate, that's the spot where that is celebrated. And I think that's a good thing. I'm all in favor of celebrating stuff that's important. So there is the Mount of Olives, and we can see it from there. The shot on the right just shows modern streets and stairways and alleyways in the old city of Jerusalem. It's a very compact old city. It has been built and rebuilt and remodeled and torn down and fought over and argued over and built over so many times that it is actually really difficult to tell what is what. There's an awful lot of medieval stuff. We'll find lots of remains from the Crusader period that began around 1100 AD. We'll find a lot of material from the so-called Mamluk period, which is after the Crusaders were pushed out of Jerusalem around 1299, when the Crusader era ended completely. The Egyptian slave soldiers, who were called the Mamluks, took control of Jerusalem, and they put their mark on the architecture. A while after that, after the Mamluks had been in charge for a while, the place was taken over by a very powerful Turkish caliph named Suleiman the Magnificent around 1500 AD. He actually rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. Those walls had been down ever since the fall of Jerusalem to the Crusaders in 1099. And the Crusaders never really built them back up again, but Suleiman did. And the modern walls that we see around Jerusalem date back to the 16th century, built by Suleiman. So when you're standing in a place like this hostel roof in Jerusalem, looking out over the city, within the field of view will be artifacts and buildings and relics, whatever, dating back 3, 4, even 5,000 years, that Jerusalem has been continuously occupied. It's been there a long, long time. Okay, around the Pool of Bethesda, which is in the northern portion of the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, not too terribly far from the Damascus Gate, is the Church of St. Anne. And you may not know who St. Anne is, but Roman Catholics know. That's the name that they have given to Mary's mother. And the Bible doesn't mention Mary's mother because the Bible often doesn't mention the names of anybody's mother. When it does, it's important. Apparently, the Bible didn't think that Mary's mom was important enough for space in the Bible. But Roman Catholics think that Mary's mom is pretty important. They invented a doctrine called the Immaculate Conception, in which Mary's mother conceived Mary herself without sin. Now, the Bible doesn't teach that. It's a little difficult to understand why Roman Catholics felt that was necessary, but they do. And this church was built in the Middle Ages. It's a classic Romanesque building and has absolutely wonderful acoustics. So what you see here is a group of people. This is a Roman Catholic group. And I believe they're from Germany, but I was never entirely sure. I couldn't speak with them. But their singing was just wonderful. It echoes just a bit in that big stone room. And the echo is just right, just wonderful. On the right is the stairway leading down to the crypt, where supposedly the relics of St. Anna are kept. Right outside the Church of St. Anne is the totally ruined, partially excavated, utterly confusing Pool of Bethesda. We know that the water is there. It's down about 25 meters from the surface level, which is about right. That's where we would have expected the surface of the street level of Jerusalem to be 2,000 years ago. One of the things that's difficult about Jerusalem is that it's continuously inhabited for 5,000 years. So things have been built on top of things that have been built on top of things. So when we look for a pool, a water source in Jerusalem, we're always looking underground. We're looking way down deep. And this particular one is about 25 meters down. You can actually follow a stairway down through the ruins all the way down into the bottom. I'm not sharing a picture because it's just hard to get pictures in there. Is it the right place? We believe so. Josephus puts it there. And there's some other important stuff. We know that Jesus healed a crippled man at the Pool of Bethesda during the Passover festival in John 5. There's some problems with the text of the passage. Sometimes it's called the Pool of Bethesda, sometimes Bethzatha, sometimes Bethsaida. We think it probably is that all of these are actually transliterations of the same word. The copper scroll from Qumran helps us to find things exactly right. The copper scroll was written between 25 and 68 AD, sometime in that immediate time. And it mentions a pool that it calls Bethesda. It was a well-known pool. It was famous for purification and would have been very well known to the Essenes of Qumran because they were into pools for washing. And the excavation of the pool was done about 100 years ago near the church. And the archaeologists who did that believe that two large pools have been found cut into the bedrock. And those could have supplied some 5,000 cubic meters of water to Jerusalem. A lot of fragments of column bases and capitals and drums and whatnot. This was indeed a big monumental structure. And with the evidence from Qumran, this location is unquestioned anymore. We're sure that this is the right spot. It's not much to look at, but it's the right spot. Another pool that is also not much to look at. This is Donna standing on the edge of the Pool of Siloam. This one is south of the Temple Mount, overlooking the Kidron Valley. And this is the very pool. It has to have been the same pool where Jesus healed a blind man. The pool we know was built by King Hezekiah in the 8th century at the end of a tunnel. The spot where Donna is standing, you can't see anything behind her, but it's the right spot. The tunnel behind her goes back through the rock for half a kilometer to its input or inlet end at the Gihon Spring, outside of the ancient walls of the Jebusite fortress of Jerusalem. And from the Gihon Spring down to the Pool of Siloam, Hezekiah cut this underground tunnel, and we're absolutely certain of the tunnel. We're absolutely certain of the Gihon Spring. Therefore, we're absolutely certain of the location of the Pool of Siloam. There was, at one time, there was a bit of confusion with another pool called the Birkat al-Hamra that seems to have been misunderstood by Josephus, but modern scholars are certain today. We know that this is the right place. This little piece of carving is not a very good picture. I shot this with a flash. People wonder, why don't I use flash more often? Well, this is one of the reasons. This is what comes out. When back in the day, I was using film, and I would generally take one shot and wouldn't know whether I had gotten a picture or not until I got back home and could develop all the film. Here in the darkroom, right here in this house, my darkroom is about 5 feet away from me right now, and I haven't used it in years. But this picture, shot on slide film, overexposed, because sometimes that's what happens when you shoot quick. Anyway, it illustrates a Korban view. This is a stone vessel with a couple of carved birds, and inscribed with the word Korban, which is written in ancient Hebrew in the angular script, so we wouldn't be able to read it even if we could read it. The Korban view, vow, is mentioned in Mark 7. Jesus accuses the Pharisees of putting their property under a vow. So that all this property belongs to God. Therefore, I can't use it to support my parents in their old age or other necessary obligations that people had. The Pharisees were misusing the vow. The word korban means simply given to God. In another place in Jerusalem, in the Kidron Valley, there's an ossuary, a bone box that was found in a tomb with the inscription that says, all that a man may find to his profit within is an offering to God from him who is within. So the bone box contained the bones of a wealthy man, apparently, who had some things buried with him. And this is a warning to grave robbers. If you break into my bone box and steal the objects of gold and silver within, you should know that these were given to God, and you'll go straight to hell if you do a thing like this. It didn't work, by the way. The ossuary is empty. Was Jesus quoting a real thing? Yes, he was quoting a real thing. And this was something that people did in order to protect their property from having to pay taxes on it or having to make tithes. It was just one form of corruption. Okay, the last days of Jesus happened right there in Bethlehem, or right there in Jerusalem. There's a couple of modern day Pharisees, several of the four of them here. These are Orthodox Jews. The different outfits refer to different sects within extreme conservative Judaism. These folks have gravitated to Jerusalem for a variety of reasons. They love being close to the Temple Mount. This is their spot. And the Israeli government is very, very tolerant of the exceptionally Orthodox Jews who live in Jerusalem. I think sometimes they bend over backwards too far. Bethany is not here in the cemetery. This is a cemetery on the eastern side of the Kidron Valley, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem. And if you continue on the path through the cemetery to go up over the top of the Mount of Olives, down the other side, you come to Bethany. And that's the village where Jesus raised Lazarus, where Mary and Martha lived with their uncle Lazarus. The modern village is called El Azariah, and it's about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem, a very short walk. And it's on the eastern slopes of the Mount of Olives. Eusebius describes the city. Eusebius is a 4th century Christian historian who's a very, very important fellow. He was the bishop of Caesarea and a good friend of Constantine. the first Christian emperor of Rome. So Eusebius is an important character, and he describes the city and the tomb of Lazarus within it. Today, there's a small burial chamber that has been modified very much by the construction of a mosque, naturally. And this probably dates to the Roman period. Eusebius says that in the Roman period, there was a tomb that was shown. And he, of course, believes that that was the tomb of Lazarus. We can't be sure, but it may well be the right place. The location of the upper room is probably close to that church you see on the high ground. This photograph was taken south from a point south of Jerusalem, a couple of miles. And you can see just little bits of the old city of Jerusalem in the background. The church there is called the Dormition Abbey. And you would think that the high tower next to the Dormition Abbey would be the bell tower for the church. In fact, it's the mosque. Near every big church in Israel today, there is almost always a taller Muslim mosque. This is no different. The Dormition Abbey is actually a fairly modern building. It was built about, about 1899, so 120 some years ago. And the term Dormition means sleeping. Okay, so somebody fell asleep there. The tradition has it that this is the very spot where the Virgin Mary fell asleep. Instead of dying, she went into a deep sleep and eventually ascended into heaven. And this is the very spot. The historians tell us that the Apostle John obeyed Jesus' request from the cross to take care of his mother. Mary went to live with John in Ephesus. We know that. And there is unbroken tradition in Ephesus that that's where Mary died. There's no question that that's what happened. At any rate, the Catholics are very enthusiastic about Mary becoming a Sleeping Beauty character in a location here on Mount Zion. And it's actually a very big, very impressive church. At one time, the Dormition Abbey had the best coffee shop in Jerusalem. If we used to go, it's down in the basement of the church, and you had to know. But if you did know, it was a very comfortable, very nice place to take a break from touring, especially on hot days. When the Dormition Abbey was being built, the foundations of a previous monumental structure was found underneath it. It was a big basilica, roughly 200 by 130 feet, about 70 by 40 some odd meters. So a big building. And it was just foundations. None of the upper stones or columns were found. Clearly, this was the original Church of the Holy Apostles, or sometimes called the Holy Zion Church. And there are some portions that are still visible in a corner of the so-called David's tomb here. Nearby, there was a medieval building that the Dormition Abbey excavators didn't need to knock down. but there was a portion of this medieval building that was cleaned up and remodeled about 85 years ago, so that tourists could be shown an upper room. I'm not showing pictures of it because I don't want you to associate that. It's clearly not the right place, but the location is probably right. The location is very likely right there, or within 100 meters or so of the Dormition Abbey. There's a lot of argument there, but that I believe that's right. Up until roughly, where was this found? Up till roughly 100 years ago, conservatives always believed that Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea, and conservatives generally believed that the ancient histories are reliable, but the liberals doubt everything in the Bible, and among other things, they said we don't have enough outside evidence of the existence of Pontius Pilate at this period of time in order to believe that he was really the governor of Syria at this time. So back in 1961. The city of Caesarea, the old Herodian city of Caesarea on the Mediterranean, was being cleared away. It was a beautiful excavation. The Israelis did this, and they unearthed a dedicatory stone that had been reused in the construction of the Roman theater of Caesarea. And the theater, of course, is a huge monumental building. And this stone that you see in the picture was taken from that area. And if you can read this, it's in Latin terms. The first line is Tiberium, relates to the emperor Tiberius, which immediately puts us during the time of Christ. And then the second line, you can see a U.S., the last letters of the name Pontius, and then Pilatus, Pilatus, Pontius Pilatus. The rest of the inscription is a little harder to read, but during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, the governor Pontius Pilate dedicates this theater for the glory of Rome, or something to that effect. Pontius Pilate, of course, didn't donate the money for this. He taxed the people to be able to build this thing for them, but that's what politicians always do. Pilate had this thing erected. We know that Pontius Pilate, according to other Latin records, was the prefect of Judea. He was the governor of Judea from AD 26 to AD 36. He's clearly the Roman authority before whom Jesus appeared, and the historical record with this stone in particular is now absolutely clear. The Bible is precisely right about exactly what happened. Before Pilate, Jesus was condemned to death, not just an ordinary death, but the death on the cross. Crucifixion was a uniquely cruel punishment. Having one's head chopped off, like with a guillotine or an axe, was quick and virtually painless. So that was done for the nobility. Being shot quickly was considered an honorable way to die. But a crucifixion or a hanging is saved for common criminals. people you wanted to suffer for a while. Now, crucifixion is just awful. We know that the Romans used crucifixion as a way to terrorize populations they were trying to control, hostile populations. When the Romans went into places where the Greeks had established their civilization before, they rarely used crucifixion because they didn't want a hostile population. So they were very cooperative with the old Greek civilization. In places where they moved in on tribal groups like Gaul, modern France, crucifixion was very common because the Romans insisted that the local people obey out of fear. So the Roman army was effective, but could be gruesome. So we know of thousands of victims of crucifixion by the Romans in Judea, but there's only one victim of crucifixion who's ever been found by archaeologists. He was a Jewish man who died sometime during the 1st century AD. His tomb was a tomb called a kokim, a kind of a stand-up tomb. And it was excavated in 1968 in Jerusalem. The man's name was Yehohanan. He was about 5 feet 6 inches tall and probably had a speech defect. We know that from from the skeleton that was left behind. And then one gruesome detail of the Yehohanan burial is the heel bone. You can see here an iron nail still protruding from this heel bone. The scholars are still debating the posture of this man on the cross, but what we do know is that crucifixion was designed to be particularly cruel. Our American Constitution forbids cruel or unusual punishment. Crucifixion is right up at the top of the list of that. You could never get away with executing the most horrible criminal with this kind of a punishment. It involved a very, very slow death as a result of fluid buildup in the lungs and in the sac around the heart, the pericardium, and eventual exhaustion and asphyxia. So you couldn't breathe. And in order to breathe at all, the crucified man would have to lift himself up with his legs, pushing against the nail that's holding his feet to the cross, and have to pull himself up on his crucified hands. It's horrible, and would routinely take many hours, during which the individual was hanging there for everyone to view and to mock. Terrible thing. And we think this is an example of that. Not that we need a lot of proof, but it gives us some background. Okay, where was Jesus buried? There are 2 spots to consider. The spot on the left is the so-called garden tomb, and the spot on the right is the so-called Holy Sepulchre. The Holy Sepulchre was built as a church first by the mother of Constantine, who was called Saint Helena. And the tradition has it that she went to Jerusalem and asked the local Christians for their suggestions on where to look, and they pointed to a pagan temple. I said, this is about the right place. So good St. Helena had the pagan temple knocked down. Now, by the way, it's entirely likely that the Romans, after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, would have built a pagan temple over the site of a holy place. That's entirely possible. So this isn't an argument against the rightness of this place. But Helena knocked down the temple, and underneath she found a cistern, which is a place for storing water. And she sent workmen down into the cistern, and in the excavated cistern were found several large timbers. And they were dragged out. And good St. Helena, in a vision, was guided to pick one of those timbers as the true cross of Christ. There's frankly, there's no possibility that that's true, or that that's a correct way of discovering the true cross. There's no possibility that that's a valid method. Nevertheless, having had her vision, St. Helena decreed, this is the place, and a pair of churches were built on the area, one over the tomb itself, which is the big lead dome in the back, the larger dome. And she picked a nearby stone outcropping to be Golgotha, the place of crucifixion, about 20 meters away from the place of the tomb. And again, there's no evidence that the place of crucifixion and the tomb were that close together. Nevertheless, it's a popular idea amongst some. The other possible location is the so-called Garden Tomb, sometimes called Gordon's Calvary. General Gordon was a British military leader, fought in the Battle of Khartoum back in the 18th or the 19th century, 1870s, something like that. Khartoum in the Sudan, and that's where he died. Before he was stationed there, he was stationed in Jerusalem, and he also had a number of visions and a number of strange ideas, and he decided that this old tomb on the north side of the old city is probably the tomb of Christ. And next to it, again about maybe 50 meters away, was a rock outcropping that looked amazingly like an old skull. So he associated that with the place of the skull, and he associated the tomb with the tomb of Christ. Now, Gordon's argument doesn't bear a lot of examining, but modern archaeologists have actually gone into this area and given us a bit more information. Let's first look at the Holy Sepulchre from the inside. The photograph on the left is the view up the stairs from the so-called crypt of the invention of the true cross. And I'm not making this up, that's what they really call it. And that crypt is a way underground, and that's where the original cistern was located. The picture in the middle is a part of the ambulatory. Big monumental Catholic churches have often a place for pilgrims to wander all the way around while services are going on inside. The place the picture on the right is the rotunda around the tomb itself. And you can see a bit of scaffolding. The so-called tomb was covered up with with a kind of plaster and cement outer covering by the Crusaders. And the inner part actually shows an inner and an outer tomb. There appears to be a real tomb there. There is evidence of quarrying in the vicinity. So this may well have been a tomb in the midst of a stone quarry. Perhaps there was a rich man's garden nearby. There's no evidence of that, but it's a possibility. There's not much attractive to Western Christians in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but it does have the advantage of a very, very long tradition and at least some archaeological evidence. So just on the basis of that alone, we have to say it's a possibility. We don't like it, but it's a possibility. I always take my students to the Holy Sepulchre when I go to Israel. My pastor is on his way to Israel right now, and I am quite certain he will visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he won't like it a whole lot more than I do. But we still have to consider it. The Garden Tomb, on the other hand, is a lot more pleasant place for particularly Protestants to visit. It's a lot more, it's evocative. It looks like an actual tomb. The photo on the right is the rock outcropping that Gordon thought looked like a skull, and it might have 150 years ago. It's hard to say. Some of the old photos we have look a little like a skull. The real reason it would be called the place of the skull is that it was a convenient place right outside the Damascus gate of Jerusalem, where two roads intersected. The northbound Damascus road went out that way, and it was intersected by the Jericho road. Jericho to Tel Aviv road goes right past. So at this intersection would be a good place for the Romans to do their crucifixions. There are several tombs nearby in a variety of different directions, and a lot of burials were done in this area. So we know it was a place of execution. We know it was a place of punishment in biblical times. So that's one. The Golgotha Hill is actually a possibility. It could be the right place. One of the things that makes me like it is the fact that the Arabs have chosen this place to build their bus depot. You can see a bus there in the foreground. This is the old East Jerusalem bus depot that goes all the way back into the early settlement of Jerusalem when the Arabs first started running buses. They looked for a place to put their bus depot that would be as insulting as possible to Christians and Jews. So this was their spot. The Garden Tomb has actually more than one tomb, but this is the tomb that we all go to, and this is the tomb that we know. It has some very good evidence. There are several really, really large cisterns in the immediate area. There is evidence that this area was used for the growing of olives. We find evidence of olive presses and a wine press. So there may also have been a vineyard nearby. So this would have been a working Judean garden. And in the middle of it, this tomb was cut. The tomb itself was not a brand new tomb in New Testament times. It was probably 700 or 800 years old, dates back to the Iron Age in Judea. There's no evidence that it was ever used, but it's definitely an old tomb. When we put all of the evidence together, the possibility that this is the right place is high enough that I feel good about taking visitors there. It may not be the right place. The Holy Sepulchre might be the right place. But when I want to get particularly students to think about what Jesus did, and how he went to the cross for our sins, was died and laid in a tomb, was resurrected from this same place. The Garden Tomb helps me illustrate that, so I prefer it. Now you'll notice that there's quite a bit of carving on the face of that tomb area. There's carving in the walls, and there's carving in the stone floor out in front that suggest that this was in fact a place of Christian veneration. It's quite likely that there was a what we call a martyr's dome built over the top. There's carvings in the stone piazza here that suggest the presence of a baptistry. There are crosses and other symbols carved into the wall. There is no question in my mind that this was a place where Christians met. We don't have anything else to go on, but there's no question that this was a place where Christians met. The door to the tomb is fairly obvious in the middle, rectangular door, but up and to the right of that door is a little hole that is a window. Now, generally speaking, tombs don't need windows. Whoever's inside there has been dead for a while, and he's not going to look out, and you definitely don't want to look in. But it's interesting that this wall faces toward the east. And in the spring, at Passover time, at sunrise, the light comes directly through that window and illuminates one of the three benches inside the tomb that would have held a body. The body is obviously no longer there. It's an empty tomb. But did Christians cut that window so that for Easter sunrise services, they could come here and see the sun come up on the empty tomb? Could be. I can't think of any other reason why there would be a window in this particular tomb. But anyway, those are the two spots, and those are the two interesting things. I'm going to mention one more thing before we leave, and that's the Shroud of Turin. And if you happen to be in northern Italy and can get over to Turin, it's worthwhile stopping to see the Shroud of Turin. It's just kind of an interesting old thing. The photograph on the left is an enhanced version of the shroud. The photograph on the right is what you actually see. It's kind of a grayed out negative image of the face of a man. So you can see the face in the upper part of the shroud. You can see the rest of his body with his arms crossed, his feet together, and you can see nail holes and blood stains. It's really quite the interesting artifact. And the Bible, of course, speaks of a burial shroud and the grave clothes. The Synoptic Gospels speak of a single shroud. John seems to refer to two separate pieces. Doesn't really matter. John is probably being more accurate. The Shroud of Turin first pops up in a place called Lirey in France in 1357. It was produced by a famous knight by the name of Geoffroy de Chanay. Now, he had this piece of linen cloth, 14 feet long by 3 feet wide, and on the cloth was the image of an unclothed, bearded man with the marks of crucifixion. The cloth was eventually given to the Duke of Savoy, who took it to Turin in Italy in 1578. In 1983, Pope Paul VI called it the most important relic in the history of Christianity. And so it was fairly important that this particular relic be checked out. The history of the shroud prior to 1357 is unknown. We literally don't know anything about it. It's entirely likely that it was brought to Europe during the Crusades. So somebody in the Middle East sold this to a crusader. Okay, so we know that part. The crusader may well have believed that this was the burial shroud of Christ. And he brought it back, and it became public in 1357. Okay, the image was photographed in 1898, at which time scholars noticed that the image is a negative. It's not a positive, it's a negative. It wasn't painted on as a positive. It was a photographic image, like the negative in a camera. There's been a lot of discussion about that, and most scholars, particularly in the 20th century, when we know this, say that the photographic technology was unknown prior to the 19th century. Nobody knew about this. So why would anybody create a photographic negative image? It therefore could not possibly be a forgery. It had to be real. So there have been a variety of modern scientific tests that have been done on the shroud, beginning in 1977. None has proven that the shroud is a fabrication, but none of them have proved that the shroud is authentic either. The cloth we know is made of hand-spun thread. It's likely to have been produced sometime before 1200 AD, when mechanical thread making machines were invented. Carbon-14 was actually done on some fibers of the shroud in 2 separate laboratories, and they agreed that the cloth itself was produced in about the 14th century, so around the 1300s. So that makes it a forgery. It can't have been the original. But the shroud enthusiasts remain unconvinced. And they claim that not enough testing has been done. We've got to be sure. Some argue that the cloth may be recent, and there's no explanation for the image, which perhaps is a complete miracle. Okay, it's definitely not painted. It's not used by any other process that was known in the medieval world. Possible that calcium from limestone in a tomb reacted with alkalis in a decaying body to produce the yellowish stain, but the detail of the image can't be explained. University of Chicago tests suggest that Jerusalem is the origin of the limestone crystals that are found in the shroud. So the mystery grows. It's almost certainly a fraud. Even if a first century Jerusalem origin could be demonstrated, it would be impossible to prove that it belonged to Jesus. We simply can't prove it. The cloth itself dates to the 14th century, almost certainly, and it may well have been done in Jerusalem. because of the limestone, but it doesn't date to the time of Christ. Recent studies, the most recent data I have on the Shroud of Turin was actually done by a professor at the University of Idaho, just several hours south of us where we live. And he demonstrated a simple process. He made a piece of artwork, just dark black on a white piece of paper, and laid that over a piece of cloth in the sunshine. So a summer day in Idaho, we actually do get sunshine. And he left it out there for about 2 weeks under strong sunlight. And at the end of that time, there was, in fact, the faint negative image on the cloth. So all that would have to have been done is that a forger would make a painting of a crucified man on a piece of silk or thin material of some kind, and laid that over the top of a piece of linen. Left it in the sun for a couple of weeks, and you get plenty of that in Jerusalem, and the shroud would have been produced. And from there, simple job for the scam artist to sell that to a crusader. And the rest, as we say, is history. So the Shroud of Turin is, I'm afraid, not legitimate. It's I don't blame the Pope for being convinced. He would love to have a relic like this, but it's clearly not true. So anyway, enough for that. That's a whole lot of background, a whole lot of details. On Wednesday, we're going to go on. We're going to go on to the archaeology of Paul's life. So we'll be going out into the Mediterranean and looking all over the place. And this is kind of a fun thing. So we'll go on to there. Let me end this. Thank you all for sticking around. You are so good. It's good to see everybody. I see Oscar there. Okay, I'm going to unmute everybody. Oscar and Don, everybody can unmute now. Thanks for your attention. You guys are so good at this. I hope that this background helps. I really, truly, honestly wish that I could take all of you to Jerusalem with me. I can't even go myself anymore, but I wish we could do that. That would be more fun than you could possibly imagine. But this is the next best thing. So as we go on, I'll show you as many pictures as I can from New Testament sites in the life of Paul, because every true proposition is surrounded by a vast web of trivial details. And everything that ever really happens leaves evidence in the stones. So the stones are going to continue to cry out, and we'll have some fun with that. We'll see you again on Wednesday. So bye-bye for now. Love you all. And we'll see you guys. Bye-bye, guys. I see Roger there, and I see Mark. Hi, Mark. Good to see you, man. Lorena, good. Bye-bye, Joyce. See you again. And Axel, good to see you, man. Lovey, Christy. Okay, guys, we'll see you on Wednesday, and we'll continue this. Bye-bye.